Cowboy healed the native woman, never knowing she would repay him with love that changed his life. The sun was setting over the wide, dusty plains, casting long shadows across the land. The cowboy, a tall, rugged man with a weathered face and broad shoulders, rode his horse steadily through the open wilderness. He had spent years working on his ranch, alone most of the time, with only the cattle and his horse for company. He liked it that way. He was used to solitude. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was a life he knew well, and it was all he needed. So he thought. Today, however, the cowboy had left the safety of his land to ride further out into the wilderness. It wasn't something he usually did, but something had tugged at him, a feeling he couldn't explain. As he rode through the rolling hills, the cool breeze brushed against his face, and the wide open spaces stretched endlessly before him. Peace. There was a sense of peace here, far from the bustling noise of the world. But as he crested a hill, something unusual caught his eye. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he drew closer his heart skipped a beat. There, lying by the edge of the forest, was a woman. She was crumpled on the ground, her clothes torn and covered in dirt, her face pale with pain. The cowboy quickly dismounted, his heart racing. Badly. She didn't move as he knelt beside her. He could hear her shallow breathing and the quiet rustle of the wind, but other than that, it was silent. The cowboy's mind raced. Who was she? What had happened to her? And most importantly, how had she ended up all the way out here, alone?
The woman was native. He could tell by her features and the way she carried herself, even in her unconscious state.
Her dark hair was braided, and her skin was a warm bronze color that spoke of a life spent outdoors. The cowboy's hands shook slightly as he gently touched her shoulder, trying to wake her. "Miss?" he said softly, but there was no response. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had to help her. There was no choice. He had been taught to never ignore someone in need, no matter who they were. He quickly scanned the area around them. There was no sign of anyone nearby. No other people, no horses, no sign of a struggle. He wondered what had brought her out here and what had caused her injuries, but now wasn't the time to ask questions. With careful hands, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her gently. She felt light, almost fragile, but her body was limp and unresponsive.
He mounted his horse, holding her securely in front of him, and set off at a fast pace toward his ranch.
It was the closest place he could think of where she might receive help, and he hoped he could get her there in time. As he rode, the cowboy's mind was filled with questions. But most of all, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman in his arms. But she was so still, so quiet. And yet, there was something about her presence that seemed important.
He had no idea who she was, but something deep inside told him that he couldn't leave her to die out there in the wilderness.
The ride back to his ranch felt long, the road bumpier than usual, as if the land itself were testing his patience. Every step the horse took seemed to stretch the minutes into hours. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cowboy arrived at his ranch. The horses whinnied in the distance, and the smell of fresh hay greeted him as he rode into the stable area. The cowboy carefully dismounted and, holding the woman in his arms, carried her into his small, modest cabin. Inside, the warmth of the fire crackled softly, and the scent of leather and wood filled the air. He gently laid her down on the small cot he used for himself, then hurried to fetch water and supplies. His hands moved with purpose, but his mind was still racing with questions. What should he do? He had no medical training, only the basic knowledge that came from years of working with horses and cattle. But he knew enough to understand that the woman needed help, immediate help. He had to stop the bleeding, clean her wounds, and make sure she didn't slip away. He worked quickly, gently washing the dirt and grime from her face and body. Breath, He tried not to look at the injuries too closely, but he couldn't help noticing the signs of abuse.
Her body bore marks of violence, the kind of marks that spoke of a life that hadn't been easy.
She was strong, that much was clear. But even the strongest people had their breaking points. As he worked, the cowboy noticed something strange. There was a quietness about her, even in her unconscious state. Her breathing was steady now, and her body seemed to relax as he treated her wounds. It was as if she trusted him, even though she didn't know him. The cowboy paused for a moment, his hand resting on her forehead. He felt a deep sadness wash over him. What had happened to this woman? Why had she been left out in the wilderness, hurt and alone? He had no answers, but he promised himself that he would find out. He couldn't just leave her here without knowing what had brought her to this point. By the time he finished cleaning her wounds and bandaging her up as best as he could, the sun had fully set, leaving the room bathed in the soft glow of the firelight. The cowboy sat by her side, watching over her as she slept. There was something about her that tugged at his heart, something more than just the need to protect her. He had a deep respect for people who survived, for people who had endured hardships and still managed to keep going. It was a quality he admired, and it made him want to do everything he could to help her. But there was also something else. A quiet pull, an unexpected connection. It was as if they had shared a past, though he knew that wasn't possible. He had never met this woman before in his life. And yet there was something about the way she looked at him, even in her unconscious state, that made him feel like they were somehow connected. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change. He had no idea who this woman was, or what had brought her to the brink of death. But as he sat there by her side, watching over her, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something important, a new chapter in his life, one that would be filled with unexpected twists and turns. Chapter that would bring love into his life, in a way he could never have imagined.
As the fire crackled and the night grew deeper, the cowboy remained by her side, waiting for her to wake up.
He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of hope, a sense that things might finally be different. And in that quiet moment with the woman sleeping peacefully in front of him, he vowed to protect her no matter what it took. Breaths, and the cowboy remained at her side, tending to her needs. He wasn't used to having someone else to care for, but somehow it felt right. Her presence, even in her stillness, filled the cabin with a quiet energy he hadn't realized he was missing.
The woman, Aylin, was her name, though he had learned it only after a few days of nursing her back to health.
At first, Aylin didn't speak much. She was weak from her injuries, and though the cowboy had done his best to care for her, it was clear she had been through more than just the physical pain. There were times when her face would cloud with fear, even while she slept, as if some memory haunted her. But no matter how hard he tried, she wouldn't tell him what had happened to her. The cowboy had his own share of hardship, but he was no stranger to quiet suffering. He didn't push her to speak, knowing that some wounds took time to heal, both on the outside and inside. He gave her space, letting her rest as much as she needed. But every day he noticed a little change.
She would eat when he brought her food, and her eyes would follow him as he moved around the room. Her trust, though fragile, was beginning to grow.
Breath. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Aylin stirred on the cot. The cowboy, who had been sitting by the fire watching the flames dance in the hearth, looked up. Her eyes fluttered open, the soft brown gaze meeting his with quiet curiosity. He froze for a moment, unsure if she was fully awake. "Are you feeling better?" he asked gently, his voice low so as not to startle her. She didn't answer immediately, but her lips parted slightly, as if she was trying to find the words. Her voice was soft, but it had a melodic quality to it that made his heart skip a beat. I think so," she murmured. her eyes scanning the room, taking in the cabin for the first time since she had arrived. She seemed confused, disoriented even, but there was something in the way she looked at him, something like gratitude, mixed with something else he couldn't quite place. "I'm glad to hear that," the cowboy said, standing up and walking over to her. "Great." He pulled a chair closer to her cot and sat down, giving her the space she needed. "You've been through a lot." Isla nodded, though her gaze drifted away from his, focusing instead on the floor. She seemed to withdraw into herself again, as if the walls she had built around her were going back up. The cowboy watched her for a moment before speaking again. "I'm not sure what happened to you, but you're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you." His words seemed to comfort her, though she didn't respond immediately. The silence between them stretched for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes without needing to be filled with words, breath. After a long moment, Aelin looked up at him, her eyes studying his face with a quiet intensity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. The question surprised him. It wasn't one he had thought about too much, but now that she had asked, it made him pause. He had been helping her because it was the right thing to do, because he couldn't leave her to die alone out there. But he hadn't thought about why he was doing it. "I guess I just couldn't leave you out there," he said, shrugging slightly. "No one should be alone when they're hurt." Island's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite read. "But we're different. You're a settler, and I—" She paused, her throat tightening as if the words were hard for her to say.
"I'm not like you." The cowboy's heart tightened at her words. He understood what she meant.
There was a history of mistrust between the native tribes and settlers, one that ran deep. But something about her, something in the way she had looked at him when he first found her, told him that she didn't see him as just another settler. "We may be different, but that doesn't mean I can't help you," he said softly.
"I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like you have to survive on your own."
"But you don't have to do that anymore. Not here."
Aelin didn't respond right away. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the fire.
The cowboy could see the internal struggle in her eyes, the conflict between what she had known and what she was beginning to feel. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's still asking?" "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." The cowboy smiled gently, though there was a sadness in his expression. He could tell that she was still holding something back, that she wasn't yet ready to trust him completely. But he also knew that trust took time, and he was willing to give her as much time as she needed. Days turned into weeks, and as Island grew stronger, the cowboy found himself thinking about her more and more. There was something about her, something that went beyond just her beauty. It was the strength in her, the quiet way she held herself, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders, but she carried it without complaint. It was something he admired, and it made him want to protect her even more. Island, for her part, began to open up little by little. She shared stories of her tribe, of the land she had grown up on, and of the traditions she held dear. The cowboy listened intently, fascinated by the way she spoke of her people and their connection to the land. It was a way of life so different from his own, and yet there was a beauty in it he couldn't deny. In turn, the cowboy shared his own story, of his life on the ranch, of the years he had spent working alone, of the quiet solitude that had once been enough for him. As he spoke, he realized how much he had come to appreciate her presence. She had brought something into his life that had been missing for a long time, something he hadn't even known he needed. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Island looked at him with a soft expression, her eyes reflecting the flickering light. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for being so closed off at first." The cowboy shook his head, smiling. "There's no need to apologize." "I understand. It's not easy to trust someone. Eileen nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. I never thought I would find someone like you. Someone who would care. The cowboy's heart swelled at her words. He had never thought of himself as someone special. Just a simple cowboy doing what he had to do to survive. But hearing her say that, it made him realize just how much he had come to care for her.
You're not alone anymore, he said, his voice steady and reassuring.
As the days passed, their bond grew stronger, and though neither of them spoke of it, there was an unspoken understanding between them. The cowboy had never expected to find someone like Eileen in his life, but now that she was here, he couldn't imagine his days without her. And Eileen, for the first time in a long while, felt safe. Not just in the cowboy's care, but in his presence. Neither of them knew where this path would lead, but one thing was certain. Their lives had already begun to change in ways they hadn't expected.
The days on the ranch were getting warmer as spring slowly began to unfurl across the land.
The cowboy had become accustomed to the sound of Eileen's quiet laughter, the gentle rhythm of her presence in the cabin. Her recovery was well underway, though she still had moments where the weight of her past would cloud her thoughts. But these moments were becoming fewer, and the cowboy couldn't help but notice how much stronger she had grown in spirit and body. Still, there was an undeniable tension that lingered between them, a kind of quiet understanding that they were both living on the edge of something unspoken. Neither of them dared to cross that line, even though the connection between them had deepened more than either of them could have predicted. It was late one afternoon when the tension finally broke. The cowboy had been working out in the fields all day, the sun beating down on him as he tended to his chores. His shirt clung to his back from the sweat, and the ache in his muscles reminded him of just how much he had come to rely on the physical labor to clear his mind. But even the hardest work couldn't erase the thoughts of Eileen. They lingered like a quiet hum in the background, always there, always present. As he rode back to the cabin that evening, his horse's hooves making soft thuds on the dirt road, he saw Eileen standing by the garden, her back to him as she worked with the plants. She looked peaceful, absorbed in her task, the soft breeze moving her hair around her face. He slowed his horse to a stop, watching her for a moment, feeling a strange pull in his chest. There was something about the way she carried herself, so confident, yet so fragile at the same time. It was a quiet strength that he admired deeply. Breath. He dismounted and tied his horse to the post outside the cabin before walking toward her. The scent of the flowers in the garden filled the air, a mix of fresh earth and blooming color. But it was a stark contrast to the hard, dusty life of the ranch. Eileen's presence had softened the space around him, made it feel more alive, more vibrant than he could have imagined. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice gentle but carrying through the stillness of the evening air. Eileen looked up, and for a moment her expression seemed uncertain. But then she smiled softly, nodding. "I could use some," she said, her voice warm but quiet. "Psst." The cowboy moved to her side, squatting down beside her as they worked together in the garden. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Best. It felt natural, like the quiet moments they shared had become an unspoken language between them. As they worked, the cowboy couldn't help but notice how much more at ease Eileen seemed. Her shoulders were relaxed, and there was a soft light in her eyes that hadn't been there when he first found her. It was as if, little by little, she was beginning to let go of the weight she had carried for so long. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the land. The cowboy felt a sense of contentment settle over him, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just the work or the ranch that had brought this feeling. It was Eileen. Her presence had changed something in him, something deep inside, like a seed that had been planted and was slowly beginning to grow. As they finished up, Eileen wiped her brow with the back of her hand, standing up and stretching her back. The cowboy followed her lead, wiping his hands on his pants before standing as well. "It's beautiful here," Eileen said, her gaze sweeping across the land. "You've built something special." The cowboy looked out over the fields, taking in the view with a sense of pride. "It's not much," he said quietly. "Just a little piece of land, but it's home." "Home," Aelin repeated, her voice soft. "It's something I haven't known in a long time." There was a note of sadness in her voice, one that the cowboy couldn't ignore. He turned toward her, his expression serious. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said, his voice steady. "This place, it's yours too if you want it. You don't have to keep running." Eileen met his gaze, her dark eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. For a moment, there was silence between them, thick with unspoken words. But then, just as quickly, she looked away, her shoulders tensing slightly. "I'm not sure I can stay," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy's heart sank, though he tried not to show it. Past was something she couldn't easily escape. The scars, the memories, they were all still there, lurking in the shadows, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real.
"I understand," he said quietly, though a part of him didn't want to.
Breaths. He didn't want to let her go. Not now. Not after everything they had shared. But he knew it was her decision to make. "I don't know if I can trust anyone," Aelin said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been on my own for so long." "I don't know if I can open up to anyone. Not even you." The cowboy took a slow, steady breath, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You don't have to trust me all at once. You can take your time, but I'll be here. I promise." She looked at him then, her gaze meeting his with something that seemed almost like fear. But there was something else in her eyes, too, something deeper.
She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, a sound from the distance caught their attention.
It was the sound of hoofbeats, distant but growing louder. Eilin's face went pale at the sound, her body stiffening. The cowboy felt a pang of concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Eileen hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the horizon where the sound was coming from.
"They're coming," she said, her voice barely audible.
"My people," the cowboy's brow furrowed. "Your people?" Eileen nodded slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped them on her dress. "They'll be looking for me. I have to go." The cowboy's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't want her to leave. Not now. Not when they had just begun to understand each other. But he could see the fear in her eyes, the way her body tensed at the thought of facing her past. He knew that he couldn't keep her here against her will. "Do you want to go back?" he asked softly. Eileen nodded, though her expression was conflicted. "I don't have a choice," she said quietly. "I can't stay here forever." The cowboy watched her for a moment, unsure of what to say. There was a part of him that wanted to tell her to stay, that she didn't have to go back to the life she had left behind, but he knew that it wasn't his place to make that decision for her. "You don't have to go alone," he said after a moment, his voice firm. "I'll go with you, if you let me." Eileen looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You'd come with me, even though you're a settler?" The cowboy smiled softly, a quiet determination in his gaze. "It doesn't matter. I promised you that you wouldn't be alone. I'll keep that promise, no matter where you go." There was a long pause before Aylin finally nodded, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "I don't know what's waiting for me out there," she said softly, "but maybe it's worth facing together." The cowboy reached out then, gently taking her hand in his. For a moment the world seemed to stand still as they stood there, their hands intertwined. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time they'd both felt a sense of hope, a sense that whatever came next, they wouldn't have to face it alone. The following morning, the cowboy and Aylin stood at the edge of the ranch, watching as the distant figures of her tribe appeared on horseback, moving steadily toward the cabin. The sun had just risen, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink. The cool morning air was filled with the sound of birds chirping, yet there was a quiet heaviness that settled between them. Aylin had spent the night restless, her thoughts racing. The cowboy had stayed close by her side, offering her the comfort of his presence. But Aylin knew this moment was coming. She knew her past would catch up to her. And the cowboy's gentle reassurance couldn't change the fact that she was still bound to her tribe, to her way of life, a life filled with rules, expectations, and struggles she had tried so desperately to escape. Bah! She had no idea what would happen when they arrived. Would they understand that she was different now? Would they accept her back after everything that had transpired? Or would they see her as a traitor? The fear settled in her chest like a stone. Bet she had left them once, but could she return and find a place again? Could she walk away from the cowboy and the life they had begun to build? He turned to the cowboy, the uncertainty in her eyes. He could see her distress, her vulnerability, and he understood that this wasn't just about him or her. It was about both of their worlds colliding. "Are you sure about this?" the cowboy asked, his voice low but filled with concern. He wasn't certain if he was ready to face what would happen when they reached her tribe, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't leave her alone. Aylin took a deep breath and nodded, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of her shawl. "I have no choice. They're coming for me, and I can't keep running. But I don't know if they'll accept us together." "It's not that simple." The cowboy stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "You don't have to be afraid."
"I'll go with you. We'll face this together, whatever comes."
Aylin's heart warmed at his words, but there was still a lingering fear in her eyes. She had no idea how her people would react to a settler standing by her side. For them, the cowboy represented everything they had fought against: the intrusion of settlers into their land, the destruction of their traditions. She was afraid that the moment they arrived, everything they had built would come crashing down. The distant sound of horses' hooves grew louder, and Aylin's stomach tightened. Her people were near. "They would soon be here. I just don't know what they'll say," she whispered. "We'll face them one step at a time," the cowboy assured her, his voice steady. "No matter what happens, we stand together." "And if they don't accept me, I'll leave, but I'll never leave you." His words, simple and unwavering, were like a warm blanket to her heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to absorb the comfort he offered. It was true. She had never expected to feel this kind of support, this kind of love. It was a love that had blossomed out of the most unexpected circumstances, and yet it felt like it had been growing between them for far longer than either of them realized. As the riders drew closer, Aylin mounted her horse, her fingers gripping the reins tightly.
The cowboy followed her lead, his own horse steady beneath him.
The moment had arrived. The time for silence was over.
They had to move forward. The cowboy, ever the protector, rode beside her as they began their journey toward the gathering place of her tribe.
It was only a short ride, but the tension in the air felt like it could snap any moment. Every time Eileen glanced toward the cowboy, she saw the calm determination in his eyes, a silent promise that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The tribe's camp came into view, a circle of tents pitched beneath the shade of tall trees. The figures of men and women could be seen moving about, preparing for what looked like a meeting. Eileen's heart began to race again, and she felt a cold sweat form on her brow. She hadn't expected to come back like this, riding in with a settler by her side, someone who represented everything her people had fought against for so long. As they approached the camp, the riders slowed, their faces hard and unreadable. Eileen's breath caught in her throat as she saw the leader of the tribe, a tall, powerful man with a stern gaze, watching them approach. This was her father, the man who had raised her in the ways of her people. His expression was unreadable, but Eileen could feel the weight of his gaze on her. She had never felt so small in her life. The cowboy and Eileen dismounted together, and the cowboy stayed close by her side, his hand resting on the hilt of his gun, though it wasn't drawn. He was ready to stand by her, but he knew the situation was delicate. They were in unfamiliar territory, and he had no way of knowing how her tribe would respond.
The leader of the tribe stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the cowboy.
"You bring a settler here?" he asked, his voice rough and filled with disbelief. Eileen swallowed hard, her throat tight with nerves. "He's with me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. "He helped me when I was in danger." "He's the reason I'm alive today." The leader's gaze shifted to Eileen, and for a long moment he said nothing. His expression softened just slightly, but there was still a hardness to it. "You have returned to us, but you bring a stranger," or some man who stands with your enemies. Eileen shook her head, her eyes meeting her father's. "He's not my enemy. He's someone who showed me kindness when I needed it. He's been nothing but good to me." Her father's gaze softened for a moment, but it quickly hardened again as he turned to the cowboy.
"You have no place here. You will leave."
The cowboy stood tall, unwavering in his decision to stand by Eilin's side. He didn't speak at first, but his jaw clenched in determination. "I'll leave when she tells me to leave. I'm here because she asked me to be." Eileen watched the exchange with a mix of fear and awe. She had never seen the cowboy stand up to her father like that, never thought he would take such a strong stance. She could see that the leader of her tribe wasn't convinced. But the cowboy's words had left an impression. "I will not stand in the way of your tribe," the cowboy continued, his voice calm and respectful. "But Eileen is not alone in this world. She doesn't have to fight her battles alone anymore. She has a choice." There was a long silence as the tribe's leader considered the cowboy's words. The air between them was thick with tension, but it was Eileen's quiet voice that finally broke the silence.
"I have made my choice," she said softly, her eyes meeting the leader's. "I'm not running anymore."
"I'm not going back to a life that doesn't make sense to me. I will live my life as I see fit." Her father stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding, his face betraying no emotion. "You are free to choose your path, but know this. The tribe will not forget this day. There are consequences for your actions." Eileen nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. "I understand." The cowboy placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a silent reassurance. He knew this wasn't over. Not yet. But Eileen had taken the first step toward living her life on her own terms, and that was something he would support with everything he had. As the tribe's leader turned and walked back to the camp, Eileen and the cowboy stood together, their future uncertain, but their bond stronger than ever before. The road ahead would be difficult, but they would face it side by side. Whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together, as they had from the very beginning. Weeks had passed since that tense moment with Aylin's tribe, and the cowboy couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had chosen. Life had changed, and as much as he had hoped for things to calm down, he knew deep down that it wasn't going to be easy. Aylin's decision to leave the tribe and stand by him had made them both outcasts in some ways. But it was also the beginning of something new, a life neither of them had expected, yet both were willing to fight for. The ranch had become a quieter place without the hustle and bustle of the tribe's activities around. It had been a place of isolation for the cowboy for so long, and now it was home to the two of them. The cowboy worked the land just as he always had, but now Aylin worked alongside him, her hands, once used to the delicate work of weaving and tending to her people's traditions, now helped with the everyday tasks of the ranch. The rhythm of their lives had begun to blend, and the cowboy found himself looking forward to the simple moments, those moments when they worked together, when they sat in front of the fire, when they shared quiet smiles, and when their hands brushed ever so gently. But even in the stillness, there were times when the past would creep in, and Aylin would retreat into herself. It wasn't because she regretted her decision, but rather because her people's disapproval still hung heavy over her. The cowboy noticed these moments of silence, and though he respected her need for space, he couldn't help but want to ease her pain. There were times when she would wake in the middle of the night, tears silently falling down her cheeks, and he would simply hold her, offering his warmth and comfort in the only way he knew how. One evening, as the sky turned dusky pink and the cool wind carried the scent of pine trees across the land, Aylin sat on the porch steps, gazing out into the distance. Her expression was thoughtful, as if the weight of the past was still pressing on her mind. The cowboy stood a few feet away, fixing the last of the fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. The sound of hammering echoed through the air, a familiar, steady rhythm. He had learned to tune out the noise of his work, just as Aylin had learned to silence the words of her people that haunted her thoughts. After finishing his work, the cowboy walked over to her, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He noticed the distant look in her eyes and, without a word, sat beside her on the steps. The silence between them felt natural, but the cowboy knew Aylin well enough now to sense that something was weighing on her heart. "You've been quiet today," he said gently, his voice low and soothing. Ben didn't answer right away, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. For a moment the cowboy wondered if she would speak at all, but then she sighed softly and turned her gaze toward him. "I miss them," she said quietly, the words almost lost in the wind. "I miss my people, even though I know I can't go back." It's hard to explain. It's not just the way they are, but the memories. The way things were before, everything changed. The cowboy nodded, understanding more than she knew. "I can't imagine what it's like to leave everything behind, but you're here now. You're with me." Aylin gave him a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. Breath. "I know, and I'm grateful for that. But sometimes it feels like I'm standing between two worlds, neither of which I belong to anymore." The cowboy took her hand in his thumb brushing over her knuckles gently. "I won't lie, it's been hard for both of us. But you're not alone, Aylin. You don't have to choose between the past and the future. You have a place here with me. And we'll make a new future together." Her eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while she felt the weight of the world lift just a little. She could see it in his eyes. The unwavering support, the love he had shown her since that first day when he'd picked her up in the wilderness. It was real. It wasn't just words. It was the promise he had made to her from the very beginning. He wouldn't let her go. "I've never known someone who would stand by me like you do," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Not like this. You've given me a chance at a new life, I don't know what the future holds, but with you, I think I can face it, breast. The cowboy smiled softly, his hand gently cupping her cheek.
Then we'll face it together. Over the following months, life began to settle into a quiet routine.
The cowboy and Island worked the land, cared for the animals, and slowly began to build a life of their own.
It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was one they had chosen together.
And that was enough. The days grew warmer and the ranch slowly began to thrive again. Island's confidence grew as well. She had learned to adapt to this new way of life, one that was simple, but full of meaning. She spent her days tending to the garden, learning the ways of the land and helping the cowboy with the animals. The bond between them deepened, and Island began to realize that this life, this new life they had built, was hers, just as much as it was his. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the fields, Aelin stopped and looked up at the sky. The sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the land, whereas she couldn't remember the last time she had felt this at peace.
For the first time in so long, she felt rooted to the earth beneath her feet.
It wasn't just the land she was working. It was her life, her future. She was building something of her own alongside the man who had given her everything. The cowboy noticed the look on her face and walked over to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice gentle.
Sir!
Aelin turned to him, a smile spreading across her face. "I think I've finally found my place," she said, her voice full of warmth.
"And it's here, with you." The cowboy's heart swelled at her words.
It was all he had ever wanted for her, for both of them. They had found a way to make their lives work together, despite the odds. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments of doubt, but they had overcome them, side by side. "I feel the same way," he said softly, his gaze meeting hers, proud in despair. "This, us, this is where I belong." That night, as the stars twinkled above them and the fire crackled softly in the hearth, the cowboy and Island sat together, their hands intertwined. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty. They had built something together. A life, a love, and a future. And as they sat there, watching the night unfold around them, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. There was nothing left to fear, not when they had each other. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't need to know what it held. They had already found what mattered most, each other. And that was all they needed.